And I try not to comment too much on those because I don't want to get, I just kind of let people do their thing. I feel like I'm there just sort of watch. But right away in the notes I see in the chat, Paul pops up, I taste graham crackers. And I'm like, I just started to laugh. I was like, oh, I knew Paul would taste graham crackers or vanilla. Right. Those were going to be the two that I knew he was going to come up with.
Today, we're mostly going to look at New Riff.
Yeah, and thank you to the New Riff folks. They were super, super responsive as soon as I sent stuff out. Bourbon Sippers, I wrote an article about New Riff. Man, it was probably like 3 years ago now plus. Mm-hmm. And so we have a good relationship with them. They've always been willing to work with us. So I really appreciate them sending us these bottles.
Yeah, and I have not gotten to try their rye before. I've tried their bourbon. So we're going to be doing the regular bourbon. I don't know. I guess they just call it the Kentucky Straight Bourbon. And then a single barrel of the bourbon. And then their rye, and then a single barrel of the rye.
Yeah, and the idea is that I wanted to try them side by side, so we can try the bourbons together and sort of compare and contrast, because there is a price point difference here.
It's only like $15 though, right?
Yeah. Okay. And there's certainly a proof difference, but you should be able to find both of these. Like if you go somewhere where they have just the straight, the standard release, you should be able to find the single barrel as well. I haven't been too many places where they didn't have the single barrel. Now, the single barrel rye is relatively new, so you might not be able to find that everywhere you go. But I thought we'd give some people some input, maybe help them if they're trying to choose between the standard and the single barrel offerings.
And if you are part of our Patreon at the $35 Drink Along With Us tier, this month's box will include a sample of both the New Riff single barrel bourbon and the single barrel rye. Will be two of the samples that are in there. So if you're interested, go check that out on Patreon. But real quick, while I'm thinking about it, some of our Patreon members at the $20, are whiskey super fans, James.
Super fans.
They have not responded to my message asking them for their t-shirt sizes. So if you are listening and you're one of our whiskey super fans, go on Patreon, respond to my message about t-shirt sizes so I can send you one of these amazing Whiskey Uncut shirts that James is modeling. It's the best shirt you've ever heard.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So. Otherwise, we're just going to send you a kid small.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to tell us what size you want or you're going to get a tiny one.
Yeah. All right. So New Riff. Tell me a little bit about their company.
Yeah. So it's founded by Ken Lewis, who was the original owner of the Party Source. And that was a chain of really successful liquor stores that were in Southern Ohio and Northern Kentucky. And at the time when he was running that store, he had a spirits manager, Jay Arisman, who was one of the first ones to come up with this idea of going to places and picking out barrels. So they were really early on in the barrel pick idea. And Ken, when I was interviewing Ken, he said that he got to a point in his career where he felt like he had done pretty much everything that he could with the Party Source and with liquor stores.
Yeah.
And he was like, I didn't want to retire, but I was also sort of burnt out and I was getting a little bit bored. And then Jay came in one day and just sort of jokingly said, well, maybe we should just open a distillery, and started to laugh. And Ken was like, hey, why not? Let's give it a shot. And the funny thing was, and they had no idea. Neither of them had any distilling experience. They had no idea how to run a distillery. So they brought some folks in, people that used to work at MGP. Okay. So they brought them in, kind of showed them the ropes of distillation. And they came up with this idea that they wanted to really come up with products that really had the backbone of Kentucky. So they wanted to adhere to that Kentucky bourbon tradition, but with a different spin on it, and hence New Riff. Did I run that for you? Go ahead.
You mean like a New Riff?
There you go. Good. You got it. And so in this case, their New Riff, if you want to put it that way, is this rye-centric profile that they have in all of their products.
Even on the bourbon.
Yeah, so the bourbons are both high rye recipes.
Okay.
I won't go over all the mash bills, stuff like that today. If you want to look into it, it is on the Explore Whiskey site for Bourbon Sippers. You can look at a review.
30% rye.
30%.
So definitely high rye.
Yeah, so they're both high rye. And of course, the ryes, I think they're 95% rye, either that or 100. I'll have to go back and look. But it's a slight twist on what you're going to see out of the vast majority. Because still, high rye, you see high rye bourbons, but they're not nearly as common as your kind of traditional, 14, 15%. And so these are all 4 to 5 year age products at this point. They are aging stuff longer. They have some special releases they're looking at releasing some, 6, 7, 8. They're kind of putting stuff back and waiting. But I've always thought it'd be interesting to try these because it's been a while, but I've always thought these drink really, really well for 4 to 5 year bourbons.
Yeah, and just on the aroma right away of the straight bourbon, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just because I just had the Buffalo Trace, but it doesn't smell to me as like corn heavy as the Buffalo Trace did. Even though the Buffalo Trace is a little bit older, I think Buffalo Trace is usually somewhere around 6 years.
Yeah, 5 to 7, they say, I think, yeah.
So usually that corn aroma kind of dissipates as oak flavors overcome it. But I think because this has so much more rye in it, that spice is like, with the young whiskey, that spice really comes forward and makes it drink well at a young age without tasting just like young corn whiskey.
And we should say too, one of the unique things about this is a bottled in bond. And so they did both their straight bourbon and their straight rye are both bottled in bond. So these are 4 years, or at least 4 years, and they're right at 100 proof.
100 proof, yeah. 100 proof is not as high as a lot of bourbons go, but I still contend 100 proof is like the magical kind of the magical kind of point with whiskey where beyond that you don't really get a whole lot more mouthfeel with whiskeys beyond 100 proof. It's much less noticeable as you get up to like 60 and whatnot, but below 100 proof you do get noticeably thinner as you approach that 40 mark. So usually like 46 to 55 is kind of like for me the like sweet spot in terms of proof. But this on the nose is great.
I really wish everybody would do their standards at 100. Like I think anything under 100, you're really playing with fire in terms of it being a little bit too weak and a little bit too thin, especially if it's a younger whiskey. Yeah. I really wish everybody would go to 100. And I think this drinks solidly at 100. There's a lot more flavor in this. Like there's more flavor layers on this than what we saw in the Buffalo Trace. Right off the nose, you get a little bit of mint and a little bit of rye spice. You pick that up on the palate as well. And it's a noticeably heavier mouthfeel to this whiskey than what you got with Buffalo Trace.
Yeah, I would guess this was older than the Buffalo Trace. For sure.
I probably would too. But the spiciness throws you off a little bit, right? And the proof throws you off a little bit because it's just more mouthfeel.
And that's what we talked about with Koval, with the rye, is rye can handle lower proof and younger age better than bourbon can in terms of it feeling more like a mature product. So
yeah, but I think this is a really tasty, and again, we're not even to the single barrel yet. I think this is a really tasty bourbon. I like it.
Yeah, there's not much of a finish here for me.
It's not. No,
the finish is just it's a little bit sharp on the finish, and that's kind of the only aspect of it where I'm like, I feel like they could soften it up a bit with a little more age, but I mean the nose is great.
I do get a little bit of lingering rye spice though. That profile carries over a little bit. And so you get just a tad of that.
As someone who doesn't drink a lot of rye, it's not that I don't like it, but it's a little bit, to me, it's a little sharp or a little harsh.
Okay.
Just because it is so spicy compared to what I'm typically drinking.
Right. Which is
Scotch.
Yeah, like whiskey flavored water from Scotland at 80 proof.
But I mean, on the nose, I get caramel. I get, the spiciness. Just it really makes it smell like an older whiskey. It's kind of like how the Woodinville that we did had those like tobacco, leather, like flavors and aromas that made you think that it was a much older whiskey, simply because of the barrels that they chose. The rye here adds a level of spice that I associate with oak and like the spice coming from the oak. And so it smells a lot more mature than it is.
I will say too, I think, and I don't know if you have a similar opinion, but to me, there's seasonality to whiskeys. To me, Buffalo Trace is a very good spring and summer whiskey. It's very light on your palate. It's almost refreshing, or as refreshing as you're going to get for like a straight pour of whiskey. And it's very bright. This is a little bit heavier. There's more body to it. This to me is more of a cooler pour. Like I would love to have this in the fall. I'd love to have it in the winter. I think I'm expecting the single barrel to be even that kicked up a notch.
There's a really nice vanilla.
Oh, you're getting more vanilla.
Yeah, as it's sitting, as I've tasted it a couple times now, I'm able to taste past the spice a little bit more, and some of that vanilla bean is like coming up. Oh, it's good. I like it.
I mean, and this is what, a $40 bottle?
Yeah,
I think something like that. Like
40 or $50.
Yeah.
I mean, depends on your store, but yeah.
And folks, that's a really good price for a craft product. Like if
Yes.
you're looking at a well done craft product at a solid proof and 100 proof, and you're dealing with, 4 to 5 years, which is still in a pretty good range. Like that's a solid buy for a craft whiskey.
I just smelled the single barrel.
The single barrel's nice.
It's nice.
So in the single, let's
Very
move on
nice.
to the single barrel. So this is the exact same product. It's the exact same mash bill. It's just a single barrel offering. And we're looking at 106.1 proof. So we're actually not bumping up too much in proof.
So is this cast strength, or do they still proof it?
It's
down?
cast strength.
Okay.
Yeah. But they tend to be on the lower end of the spectrum with cast strength. I think a couple of the ones I've tried in the past have been like a 110, 111.
So are they proofing down before they put it in the barrel? Because I've started seeing a lot of distilleries discussing that because, and I think actually we were just on a Zoom call with Bardstown.
Yeah.
And the head distiller there, he was talking about how proofing, whether you proof down before or after the barrel, makes a difference in how it tastes. And it makes sense if you think about it logically. If you take your whiskey and it's 65 to 70% alcohol, depending on the distillery, when you put it into that barrel, and that ages, and then you cut it with plain water at the end, none of that plain water has interacted with the oak. Versus you cut it down to 50% alcohol or 55% alcohol before you put it in the barrel. Now most of all the stuff that goes in the bottle was actually still interacting with the oak over time. So it does make a big difference. And I would be curious if they're proofing it down or distilling maybe at a little bit lower ABV for New Riff compared to some of the others. Because at cast strength at only 4 years old, I would expect it to be a lot stronger than 53%.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to whether or not you gain or lose proof during the aging process, right? Which comes down to the climate in your rick house and the climate in the state where you're actually making the product. I think I remember asking them. This is, again, it's been a long time, and some of the details that I asked them about didn't make it into the article. But I'll go back and I'll look at my notes and I'll see if I can find it. But I know even the bourbon sippers pick I think we have is in the 113, 115 range. So everything's under what you would consider that, kind of standard 125 entry proof for a bourbon.
Man, this tastes really good.
Yeah, the single barrels can be phenomenal. I'm assuming they probably know which ones they're sending you to for reviews like this.
That's possible.
Like they probably know where, what barrel this came from, and they know the quality of it for the reviews. But just on the nose, it's funny because I don't get as much spice as I do, but there's more depth to it.
Yeah.
And there's more of a sweetness to it than what you get in the straight bourbon.
Yeah, actually, when I tasted it, the vanilla and caramely notes to me kind of came through as like graham cracker and like almost like it kind of made me think of like a s'more without the chocolate, just like the marshmallow and graham cracker together, and then like a little bit of like a caramel drizzle, like almost like cheesecake, kind of that kind of flavor profile, like cheesecake with the caramel on it, just creamy, like sweeter flavors.
So we have your dad here today.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take advantage of the situation.
Oh, dear.
Did Paul eat a lot of graham crackers as a child?
I don't recall that he did.
Oh, that's surprising because you pick up graham crackers in so many different products. We just had the Bardstown thing, and it was funny because we were doing the tasting, and I try not to comment too much on those because I don't want to get,
Yeah.
I just kind of let people do their thing. I feel like I'm there just sort of watch. But right away in the notes I see in the chat, Paul pops up, I taste graham crackers. And I'm like, I just started to laugh. I was like, oh, I knew Paul would taste graham crackers or vanilla.
right.
Those were going to be the two that I knew he was going to come up with.
All right. Well, does this taste like nuts to you, James?
I know, according to my friend, I say everything's nutty. And it's funny because I went back and I listened because that's how I am. And I didn't hear myself say nutty too much, but no.
You don't. I don't think I say graham cracker that much either.
It's like, I think you do. At least in my head, you taste graham cracker and vanilla and everything.
Okay. Well, we've talked about the vanilla thing. As somebody who drinks a lot of
Yeah,
scotch,
yeah.
I'm used to finding vanilla from ex-bourbon barrel whiskeys, and so it's like super subtle. And now you give me like bourbon and fresh American oak, and it's just like vanilla caramel topping. Like they're just like crazy powerful to me.
So maybe that's what's going on. Maybe your dad deprived you of graham crackers as a child, and now, like in your adulthood, you're just seeking out graham crackers.
No, I think it's all those Nilla wafers that I was eating.
Right.
They're similar to graham crackers.
You do get a little bit. I get what you mean. Like you get a little bit of like, it's kind of that burnt sugar combined with vanilla aspect that you get with a graham cracker, and that's certainly there.
Yeah.
This one to me though, even with a slight jump in proof, is just much more rich.
Yes.
Like it's a much more decadent pour. Or what did you say? Opulent. It's a much more opulent pour than what the straight and don't get me wrong, I like the straight bourbon, but I think there's a significant jump up here in terms of just flavor profile.
Again, to be fair, they may have sent us a better barrel.
They might have sent us a little bit of a honey barrel.
This is a fantastic pour.
But that's good. If you're listening to us and you're in that, or you want to move up into the Patreon level where you're going to get samples, you're going to get a sample of a really good barrel.
Yeah. And I do think, like, to me, it's harder to taste like fruity flavors in bourbons and stuff because the sweetness is the corn sweetness, the oak, the fresh oak is so overpowering. Those flavors are so much more powerful compared to what I mostly drink that it does skew, my perception a little bit, just in terms of what jumps out at me. And, it takes me longer to sit with the glass to pick out some of the other flavors with a bourbon that, might jump out at me with a scotch. But
so what do you feel about this in terms of proof? Do you feel that at 106, this is about where you would want it? Or is it a little bit too high for you? Or would you prefer it a little bit higher?
No. I mean, I drink enough bourbon that's at 50%, 55%.
So this is right in the realm of what
this doesn't bother me at all. Yeah. I think if you were primarily a scotch drinker, though, and you went to this, I think it would be a little startling. And so that's why actually when I do tastings for groups, I kind of, at this group that I did last night, I've done several with them before. And so I kind of know where they are in their experience with different whiskeys. And so the bourbons that I chose were around 90 proof to 100 max, because I know for a lot of them, anything above that would just be so startling and like off-putting just from the alcohol perspective that they might not be able to get to the point where they're like, oh, I like those flavors. And so it is something that I think you do have to work up to. But I mean, for me, this at 4 years old, the fact that this is as richly flavored, as complex as it is, not harsh. I mean, it's a great product.
It doesn't taste too grainy like you get in young whiskeys. A lot of times too, in young whiskeys, you get that kind of barnyard flavor, kind of tastes like hay and grass.
I get a little touch of grassiness.
A little bit. Yeah. And that's fine. Like I actually like that, but it's not overwhelming.
It just makes it taste fresh and young. Yeah. I mean, you can tell that it's a younger whiskey.
You can, yeah. And I think the spiciness of the rye balance out the sweetness of the corn really well.
I think if you've tried the regular New Riff bourbon, I don't think I would feel like scared of picking up a single barrel. I think it totally justifies the extra price. And I think single barrels are always tricky because it could be a totally off the wall thing or it could be right in line with it. But I've tried a few different New Riff single barrels at this point, and they don't seem to send out really off the wall stuff. So
no, there's certainly some variability. I've had ones that I like more than others. I think we tried a couple on one of our early podcasts, and I think this one to me stands out as better than those. Mm-hmm. But I haven't had one yet where I was like, okay, this just isn't really worth my money.
Yeah.
And I regretted buying it. They've all been at least solid. This one to me is really good though.
It is really good. Yeah.